Hello everyone, and welcome to the Freedom Alternative. A piece of old wisdom says that civilization was born when an offended caveman decided to curse the offender rather than pick up the most handy rock and smash the offender's skull with it, or something to that effect. Point is that curses occupy a special place in our lives. They help us discharge the negative emotions in a way that doesn't lead to death, and they also help us better explain certain concepts easier. For instance, it's a lot easier to say that something is fucking degenerate than to say that something is lacking the usual quality and property that is expected in this particularly banal situation. But while the practical applications for curses are well known, the aspect that makes them precious is the fact that they oftentimes require creativity. The problem with curses, though, is that they pose a huge issue to translators, since translating curses isn't always an easy task. For instance, if we take the classical Norwegian curse "Faen ta deg," translating it into English is easy. Fuck you! But if we go even a little bit further into slightly more creative curses, such as "Sjøen slepe fitte håsjupe," things become a little bit more complicated. Now, "Sjøen slepe fitte håsjupe" roughly means female labia can't hair soup. But because of the different language, the curse itself makes little to no sense in the English language. Things get a lot more complicated than that once we look into the area of the big three in the case of curses. The big three being Hungary, Romania, and Serbia, countries whose language permits an almost infinite level of cursing. I first gave the Norwegian example because Nordic languages with enough patience do stand a chance of rivaling the big three. So let's compare this. Probably some of the most complex curses in the English language have been coined by the South Park creators. One that comes to mind now would be "Shut your fucking face, Uncle Fucker." Now, due to the largely synthetic nature of the English language, the total amount of vulgar and curse words is minuscule. So when one wants to be creative about cursing, one has to find new ways of using the old curse words and combine some non-curse words in the hope that the message is being transmitted. So there's a lot of constraints applied by the nature of the language itself. "Shut your fucking face, Uncle Fucker" is one of the top-tier curses in English in terms of complexity. Now, I'm not saying that it is the most complex, but it is definitely above level 1, where the "fuck you" resides, or level 2, where things like "eat shit and die" reside. However, in Romanian, things go a lot easier. Here's a medium-tier curse in terms of complexity. "Băga-mi mâna în cur să-mi faci laba la căcat," which roughly means "stick your hand in my ass and jerk off my shit." Now, some outlets deem this one as the most devastating insult ever heard, but that's hardly true. Both in terms of complexity and devastation, this one is probably mid-tier and quite far from the really complex ones. Also, mid-tier curse is the one that I used to have in the intros in my old videos.
Hai sictir de pe morții mătii.
Now, I don't think I need to argue why inviting someone to literally get back into the bodies of one's mother's dead relatives is a lot more devastating than calling someone an Uncle Fucker. Now, even listing the top 100 Romanian curses and translating all of them would make for a 1-hour-long video at the very least, so we won't get into that, or maybe we will in a follow-up video if you like this one. What we will do is try to understand how these are formed grammatically and why they're formed the way they are. So, let's start with the syntax. As you may have noticed from the already provided examples, there are a lot more hyphens than usual in the correct spelling of a curse, and some of them even include apostrophes, even though the apostrophe has ceased to be part of normal current spelling in Romanian around 110-120 years ago. In fact, cursing properly in Romanian is not something an illiterate schmuck can do, at least not in writing, because writing curses properly requires quite a vast understanding on how the grammar works. Anyway, I won't bore you with those details. So, while there are without exaggeration at least 100,000 curses in the Romanian language, they can largely be summed up into 4 categories. 1. Curses related to the opponent's mother, and these are the most used. 2. Curses related to divinity. 3. Curses related to the opponent himself or herself. Category 4, teenage or lame curses. And Category 5, very creative, messed up, and uncategorizable curses. So we'll take each one of them. For the first category, the standard syntax is futuți plus object plus mătii. So that's how we have fuck your mother's dead relatives, fuck your mother's Christs, don't ask me why there's more than one Christ, fuck your mother's God or gods, fuck your mother's grave, fuck your mother's Easter, fuck your mother's Holy Communion, and we'll have to explain this one a bit further later on, fuck your mother's church, fuck your mother's cunt, though this one is rarely used, fuck your mother's onion, believe it or not, this is one of the most polite ones, and so on. The examples are infinite. You'll notice that there are a lot related to divinity, yet the curses in this category are not aimed at insulting divinity. That's just a byproduct. The intent is to insult the mother of the opponent. There's also miscellaneous mother-related curses that don't necessarily respect a formula, such as fuck your mother's cunt, and notice the different spelling. Now, these are not the only curses that aim at one's mother, but most of the others are either very uncommon or they're part of the third or fourth category. Anyway, moving forward. The curses related to divinity don't really have a readily available formula, but they get their own category because they're not creative enough to be in the fifth category. So, several examples. May the sun and the angels in the sky fuck you. May God fuck you. May I dry my underwear on his grave's cross. And now that's a reference to the standard Orthodox graves, which have a cross like this. Now, some curses related to divinity are incredibly complex. Here's an old farmer somewhere in the mountains pissed off about something. Gosh, I really hope I get the subtitles right for this. Let's watch.
Putos Dumnezeu să trăiască. Asta nu cumva să nu să extraordinar. Pută dragul Dumnezeu și Maica cea Sfântă. O rupă Dumnezeu pula ea și în soarele și Dumnezeu mătii mării cu capul. Pută Dumnezeu pământa și soarele mătii ea. Și-a spus cu asta asta, să bună mă.
Now, besides these, there are also expressions that are per se considered curses, although when translated into English seem rather innocuous. For instance, one's mother's God is not a curse in English, but it is in Romanian, and it can be used literally into any phrase. For instance, when a piece of software doesn't work, a good way to express frustration is to ask, "Dar ce Dumnezeu mami lui are?" which roughly translates as, "But what in its mother's God is the problem?" And if you don't figure it out, there's also the answer. Să-l fută Hristos dacă știu ce are, which roughly translates as, "May Christ fuck it if I know what the issue is." The divinity is pretty much a trump card, as these kinds of curses can appear almost in any category, but what's particularly noteworthy is that the arsenal of curses against the divinity itself is remarkably low. Even the examples that we did offer essentially invoke the power of the divinity to solve or alleviate the frustration. For instance, "May Christ fuck it if I know what the issue is" doesn't say anything particularly bad about Christ, and since I don't know what the issue is, it does follow that there is little to no chance of Christ actually fucking my software. Now, I won't comment whether the usage of such expressions is sinful or not, because I don't care at all, but from a linguistic perspective, it is interesting to note that very few curses directly aimed at the divinity itself can be found in a language that otherwise has no issue in generating divinity-related curses. Anyway, let's go to the third category. Now, the third category is the second most vast of all, after the fifth, of course, and it finds overlaps with all the other categories. The most interesting phenomenon is noticed in the ones that go by the formula duten plus object plus mătii, thus insulting both the opponent and the opponent's mother. And that's how we have the very popular du-te în pizda mătii, go to your mother's cunt, du-te morții mătii, which I used in the intro a while ago, go to your mother's mouth, which doesn't make much sense in English, but it's also widely used, or du-te în grijania mătii, which is almost untranslatable because grijania is the articulated form of the noun grijanie, which is the archaic name for the Holy Communion. Some would say that the word dates back to before the days of Great Schism, though I'm not convinced at all by that. So essentially this would be go to your mother's Holy Communion, but in English it sounds like you're wishing the opponent to attend his mother's event of taking the communion. But that is not the intent. The phrase is meant literally, as in the opponent should literally go into the actual bread and wine that the mother will then be served as a Holy Communion. Other curses that fit into this category are those that fit the formula futuți plus object, usually a noun, plus de plus adjective. A few examples. Futus pizda ta de muistă, futus morții tăi de lăbar, or futus cădelnița ta de poponar. The last one fitting impeccably when cursing a priest. As you may notice, the overlap with the other categories is severely noticeable. Also, there can be two or even more adjectives added at the end. So, for instance, to add further insult, one can use futus pizda ta de muistă ordinară. Now, the word ordinară, ordinary in English, usually has a bad connotation outside of mathematics. So calling a female muistă is bad enough, but if you call her a muistă ordinară, that suggests that she's not just a cocksucking whore, but one of the most regular, petty, scum of the society cocksucking whore. You can probably guess why slutwalk isn't popular in Romania. The multiple ways to describe a slutwalk, and especially to mock it, make it quite hard to convince even the most progressive feminist women to actually take the chance and attend such nonsense. Also, there are rarely such things as gender-neutral curses in Romanian. Virtually all curses are gendered, though the modern language has adapted most of the curses to the opposite sex as well. One of the words that has not yet been adapted is the pan-Eastern European insult curva, which means whore. If you want to apply it to a man, the only way to do so is to say curvă masculină, male whore, but it only works in very specific situations, and as a rule it is to be avoided because it's nowhere near as offensive as the multitudes of alternatives. In the same fashion, some curses simply don't apply to women, such as lăbar ereditar. Now, in English, it makes sense, or at least some sense, to call a woman a hereditary wanker, but in Romanian, the word lăbar refers to a man practicing masturbation, and there's no way you can reasonably apply this word to a woman, since Romanian is a Romance language and the meanings are a lot less fluid than they are in synthetic languages. Now, I could spend an hour just on this category alone because the ways to insult someone directly are virtually infinite. But I'll just play you another clip from a Romanian film with a long curse from the 1996 movie Asphalt Tango. So the fat guy is trying to rape the blonde, and this is the answer.
Făcut Dumnezeu și pasăre și Hristos și mătii de porc împuțit, cu mata care-i curvă și cu teastul pușcărie și cu tot neamul tău la balamuc. Vedeți așa cheia belit în sicriu și pe nevasta făcută poștă în cimitir. Pum! Hai să țin flatul, dracu!
Now, do you get what I'm saying with the infinite possibilities argument? Anyway, let's get to the fourth category. Now, the fourth category is largely subjective, as not all people can agree what is a teenage or lame curse. However, under this category, we can find the easiest curses possible, which also tend to have impeccable correspondence in English, and are usually the curses that even the most pious, polite, calm, and generally non-cursing person can still use them. Anyway, a few examples. So, there's fuck you, eat shit, eat my dick, suck my clit, lick my cunt. You get the point. All of these simply lack the creativity necessary to even be called proper curses by Romanian standards. That's why they're rarely used by themselves and are rather used in conjunction with other curses or with further descriptions. For instance, să-mi suci pula și cu curul și cu gura, which roughly translates as suck my dick using both your ass and your mouth, is slightly more creative, though in my subjective opinion, still not creative enough for a spot in the third category. Anyway, you get the point. The very simple curses are in the fourth category. Let's get to the fifth category, where things get really interesting. Now, curses in the fifth category are the ones that aren't even known to most people, which is why you share the text or the video of a person using it once you hear it, because it's rarely the case that you knew it already. This is where the one quoted at the beginning of the video comes from. Now, the longest curse that I know sounds something like this. Trâmea școaile în sens giratoriu prin coliva mătii din bomboană în bomboană până ce ajung la lumânare și retur. As one can notice, it fits all the above four categories as it insults the opponents both in a petty and creative way. It also invokes Orthodox Christian rituals, and it also insults the opponent's mother, or in this case the opponent's mother's memory, since the existence of the funeral cake implies that the mother has just died. Another set of insults that can only fit into this category are the ones that start with băga-mea-și pulan plus object or pronoun plus de or că plus object. Now, the last two elements are optional, and also variations include a further verb to explain the reason of the curse. Let's see some examples. Băga-mea-și pula în el de calculator că nu merge. Variations of which I use quite frequently. Other example. Băga-mea-și pula nea de masă că nu stă dreaptă. Or this. Băga-mea-și pula în conserva asta că nu pot deschide. Or this. Băga-mea-și pula în el de guvern că e plin de cretini. Now, the best way to translate the syntagm băga-mea-și pulan is through the verb fuck, as you can see I did. But the syntagm itself, translated ad literam, means I shall insert my dick into, as the hyphen n at the end is in or into. This format of cursing can be adapted with other expressions such as futui moții măsii, băgaia-și cocă în nas, or căcamaș în, or căcamaș pe. Let's see some examples. Futui moții măsii de parlament că numai legi retardate votează. Or căcamaș pe fața lui de bou sinistru. Now, with băgaia-și cocă în nas, it's a bit more complicated. Literally, it means I want to insert doff into his or her nose. But when translated into English, it's best to adapt it and put the intended meaning, namely, I wish him or her to die. The reason for this difference is that for dead bodies properly buried, wadding used to be put into the dead body's nose, for some reason. Anyway, in the countryside, wadding was unavailable either because it was too expensive or because the commies had engineered yet another shortage. Either way, pieces of rudimentary duff were being used instead, hence insert duff into the nose. Wow, I actually explained this one. Now ask any Romanian younger than 40 and I bet we'll have no idea where this one is coming from. Anyway, also in this category there are a lot of the so-called regionalisms, namely curses that are not universally used in the language but are rather common in certain areas. For instance, să te fută soarele și îngerii de pe cer is a curse whose variations can be heard in the western part of Romania. Also notice the different pronunciation, să te fută soarele versus the literal pronunciation, să te fută soarele. Conversely, curses like ia ca alta în curul preotesei is a lot more common in the eastern part of Romania. Also notice again the reference to the church and divinity. Also, for those who may not know, and they might wonder, Orthodox priests, unlike Catholic priests, are married. In fact, it is an obligation in the Orthodox Church to be married if you are to be ordained as a priest. And since 150 years ago, the status of the priest's wife conferred quite a status, which sometimes was abused, it's no surprise that the most religious area of the country, the East, also has the most curses about the priest's wife. Anyway, I could go on for another hour about curses, but I hope this video is informative enough to give you an idea why it was, for instance, very hard for me to make English subtitles for this video, or why I answer with it's not that simple to request for subtitles when I go into Romanian expletive mode into some of my videos. So, thank you for watching, and if you visit Romania, make sure you don't learn that I love you is said as futus morții mătii. Just saying. Talk to you guys later.